Hello again. I'm Father Emmett Farrell, and now we're going to move on to chapter 2. Chapter 2 goes to the judgment. We said, see, judge, act. This is judge. This is like illuminating. It's like turning on the lights, no? And we go here, like the doctor would go to the book of medicine. We go to the scriptures. We go to church tradition, former encyclicals, former popes, and the fathers of the church. What have they said? What is our doctrine? What is our tradition, no? And Pope Francis says at the beginning of chapter 2, he said, I address myself to every living person on the planet. What he means by that is this is not a Catholic problem. It's not a Democrat or Republican problem. It is a global problem. It is a human problem. So therefore, all humans have something to do with the problem, and all of us have something to do with the solution to these problems. No? Now, biblical wisdom starts with the book of creation, the book of Genesis. In chapter 1, 28, it gives to the image and likeness of God, humanity, the domination of the creation of the world. And the second, that's modified by chapter 2, verse 15, where the Creator says that we are to till the earth and protect it, no? And that modifies that dominion, no? And someone said, we have done a great job of tilling, but not so good a job of protecting, no? There are three fundamental relationships stressed in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. The relationship to God, the relationship to other humans, and the relationship to the earth. Now, there's something new there for Catholics. This is the first time in the Catholic tradition that this has at least been used to this with this emphasis. It's never really been refused or rejected, but it was never raised up like Pope Francis has done, putting the salvation of the creation, including all creation, not just humanity. It isn't just our personal salvation of our souls. It is the whole of the creation that God has given to us as a gift for us to take care of, no? Pope Bartholomew was the one in the Eastern Rite Church, the Orthodox Church, were mostly the ones who are responsible for that new emphasis that Pope Francis is giving to the environment along with humanity, and especially the poor. And Patriarch Bartholomew said, an offense against another human being or against other creators or creation is an offense against the Creator God, no? This is a sin. We have no such right, he says, no? Now, I said that in Genesis 1:28, it gives dominion to humanity, no? And that is also qualified by the till and protect. What that means is that this dominion is not an absolute. It's not something that's an unbridled exploitation of creation, of nature. But the Bible dwells on those relationships, those three basic relationships. There is no room, Francis says, for the tyrannical anthropocentrism. In other words, man being like a little god, without any consideration for the plan of the Creator. Francis says that for Christians, we must be aware of the fact that our duty toward nature and toward our Creator is an essential part of our Christian faith. Again, he's joining these two things together. Our responsibility to the Creator and our responsibility to all of creation. No? He goes on to say that through the centuries, I guess you would say, that this idea of dominion has evolved. Perhaps unconsciously, man has become all-powerful, and there is no limit to that domination. No? In the Old Testament, they were aware of how things got out of balance, you might say, no? Because the Creator intended for there to be a balance between all of the creatures, no? But it was getting out of balance. So in the Old Testament, the people were considered to be evil. They had turned away from Yahweh, from God. So God sent the prophets. He began an alternative plan, as it was, of salvation. Part of that was rest on the seventh day, no? That was very sacred. No? One was not to move things more than so many meters on the Sabbath. No? Also, there was a sabbatical year What that meant was every 7 years, people were to give back. They were to rest the land and to give back what they had accumulated. But even stronger than that was the Jubilee year, the 7 times 7, or say every 49, or we'd say every 50 years. There was a balance of all of creation, of all the accumulated wealth and of the people had stored up. It was giving back, trying to level off that everyone had an equal share of creation, no? And especially the poor. Throughout the Old Testament, I remember reading through it myself, and I was impressed that all the kings, at the end of the chapter about a certain king, they were good if they respected the 3 classical poor people, the classes of people. Who were they? The orphans, the widows, and the foreigners, no? Or we'd say immigrants or refugees, no? And that was sacred, no? I remember about this resting on the Sabbath. When I grew up, my father once said, I'm going to go in and ask the pastor today if I can work on Sunday to save a crop, to get his permission, because working on the Sunday was something a Christian just didn't do, no? The Old Testament talks about the God creator, and then the God becomes a liberator. And the thing is, it's the same God, no? The God of creation had a plan. The plan got out of balance. And so he began to develop a new plan for the salvation of his people through the prophets. And nature was a system that God had developed, and we were to follow that. And what that means is that we don't decide what we want to do with the gift he's given us, but rather we're not self-sufficient and all-powerful with unlimited dominion, but rather we are cooperators in this plan of God. We are to cultivate the uncultivated, as it were, no? And we are to protect the gift that God has given us, not pollute it, not waste it, not throw it away. And what that means, we would put it in our terms, we'd call that good stewardship, no? This balance of nature is important. I remember watching TV one night. It was Yellowstone Park, and they decided that things were out of balance, that there were too many wolves, and they were killing too many of the antelope. So they trapped and they shot and they got rid of most of the wolves. What happened? And 5 years later, they said, we have to bring the wolves back because the antelope have increased so much they're eating up all the greenery. And so that balance had to be restored. No? So what we're saying here is that God has given us as a gift the whole of the planet of creation for us to protect, to use, to live off of, but not to waste, not to abuse, and to share, no? But Judeo-Christian thinking began to evolve, and we no longer considered that the nature was a gift from God. And the church keeps reminding us that of the duty that we have to care for nature and protect humanity from its self-destruction. That sounds very drastic. Pope Francis said something right before the Paris Agreement in 2015. It was something like, after the encyclical had come out, he didn't go to the COPs 21, but he said, if we do not change, he said, the world or humanity is on a path of collective suicide. That's a very strong statement, you know? So this idea of cooperating with the Creator is part of this, the wisdom of the Scriptures, you know, that we're talking about here. The second chapter is called that, the Gospel of Creation. You know? So when nature becomes viewed as something that exists solely as a source of profit, that has very serious consequences, no? Because it runs contrary to what the Creator had in mind when he thought that there should be justice, there should be harmony, and there should be fraternity and peace, and sharing, solidarity. All these are Christian virtues when they get very much out of the perspective of the plan of God when we take all of nature for just profit, no? Every creature on the earth is dependent on every other creature, no? St. Francis of Assisi was very much aware of this, no? And in his canticle, praised God for all the things that he created, and some of them were bad. we would consider rain, chill, frost, rivers, planets, trees, animals, insects, birds. You'll find it in Daniel 3 in the Old Testament, a very long list of what that canticle is talking about. It's talking about nature, and for St. Francis, God dwells in nature. So if we study nature and we take care of nature, we begin to discover something about the Creator. We are, Francis says, one family. We are a universal family, and we are living in one house. Normally we take that to mean humans, but it includes all of the creation. So that's all of the animal and plant species as well, because they're part of creation. And Pope Francis goes on to talk about what is a scandal. We should be indignant about the inequalities that exist in our system today. And I give one example here that was shocking when I read this. It came from Oxfam Fidedigna organization in England, and I may have mentioned this before. They said that 8 individuals on the planet own $428 billion, and they named the 8 individuals. And then they said they own more wealth than the 1/2 of the poorest people on the planet, who own only $408 billion, And so the question hangs in the air, what's wrong with that picture, as we say, It's out of balance. It's inequality. And Francis keeps pushing the poor to the center of the whole of this problem about the universe, He says that all humans are equal, But it's almost as if we'd say, well, yes, but some are a little more equal than others. I don't know whether any of you have read Animal Farm. It's an old book. George Orwell, I think, was the author. I remember reading it, and there was one phrase there that was comical. The animals were running the planet, and they said, we are all equal, but some are more equal than others. And sometimes we think, well, we have a right to that. The United States, 80% of the wealth is in the hands of 20% of the people, where 5% of the population consume 20% of the world's resources. But we go back to this fact that in nature, we can't lose heart of compassion for those who are suffering, because everything is connected. It's the body idea. St. Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 12, He says that all the parts of the body, as we know, are connected. And if one part is suffering, the whole body suffers. But if all the parts are healthy, the body is healthy, And that's so also the case with nature and creation, Every time there's an act of cruelty against another human being or against an animal or against creation, that goes against the plan of God. Again, Patriarch Bartholomew said that's a sin. And it's an offense against the Creator when we offend one of His creatures, be it human or non-human, Which that means that experimentation on animals is limited, It can bring a lot of good, but there's a limit to what we can do with it. For that reason, we have what's called the Humane Society, So the earth is a shared inheritance. It belongs to all of us. It's a gift that God has given us. And there's a new thought here. I mentioned this before, that Francis is equalizing, or he's making ecology and the poor 2 parts of the problem, and they're equally important. What that means is that private property is not absolute. The Church has never stated that private property, or Christian tradition, was an absolute. It has a social purpose. In fact, the fathers of the Church went so far as to say that what I have that I don't actually need doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the poor. And we must share that. Something like that the first Christian communities in Acts of the Apostles had in mind, when they brought everything and they shared everything and no one lacked anything and nobody had everything left over. That's a great ideal, and we're a long ways from that, So God's plan is that rich and poor, no matter who they are equal in dignity, The bishops of New Zealand brought up a question. They said, what does it mean, thou shalt not kill? When 20% of the world's population consumes at a rate that robs the poor nations and future generations of what they need to survive. Again, that's a strong interrogation, no? So, God is a paternal God. He looks after creation, and he hopes that we will cooperate with him and with his plan and the balance that should be there. And the scripture says that he takes care of, and he knows the birds of the air. When one falls, he knows it, no? So he's the father of all of us, okay? And he's provident. And so he looks for that balance of nature. So, in this second chapter, we were talking about the gospel of creation. It's the plan of the Creator. We are the cooperators, we are the protectors, we are the stewards of God's gifts. All of that versus maybe the reality that we saw in chapter 1, where there is global warming because of excess warming because of human activity. So, the gospel of creation says that we have to go back to Genesis, we have to go back to God's plan and become cooperators and good stewards of the earth, okay? Thank you.